The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the way they all looked at her afterward. Not with cruelty, not even with pity, but with that particular brand of careful indifference that people reserve for things they've already decided don't matter. Josie had learned to recognize that look before she'd turned 22. By 25, she could feel it before anyone even raised their eyes. She stood at the edge of the great hall of Ashford Keep, her spine straight, her hands folded in front of her dress the way her mother had taught her when she was small. Posture is the only armor a woman without rank can afford. The hall smelled of pine resin and cold stone, of tallow candles burning low in their iron brackets, of the kind of feast that had already ended hours ago and left behind only the ghost of warmth. The long tables were half cleared. A few wolves lingered near the far hearth, their voices low, their laughter belonging entirely to itself and not to her. She had been standing there for 40 minutes. She knew, because she'd counted every candle that guttered and went out. The Ashford gathering happened once a year, the formal assembly of 7 northern packs under the old compact, held on the first frost moon to settle disputes, confirm alliances, and allow unmated wolves to present themselves before the Council of Alphas. It was tradition. It was also, as Josie had come to understand with increasing clarity over the last 3 years, a ritual designed almost entirely to confirm who already belonged and who never would. She did not belong. She had never belonged, but she kept coming, because leaving would mean accepting it. Her name had been called 3 times in the formal presentation. 3 alphas of minor standing had been given the right to approach, to breathe near her, to assess the scent of her lineage, and decide whether she was worth consideration. 3 times, the answer had come back the same. Not in words, not in any declaration that could be challenged or questioned, but in the simple, devastating act of a man stepping back and turning away. No explanation, no ceremony of refusal, just the turning. The first time, 4 years ago, she'd pressed her nails into her palms hard enough to leave marks and told herself it was because she was young, unknown, unproven. The second time, she'd told herself it was because her father's name still carried the shadow of the old debt. The third time, tonight, she had not told herself anything. She had simply stood there, her jaw level, her eyes steady, and felt something very quiet and very final settle into the space behind her ribs. She was not broken. She was certain of that, but she was tired in a way that sleep could not reach. "They think it's the bloodline," said a voice to her left. Josie didn't turn immediately. She knew the voice. Petra, her father's old housekeeper, white-haired and solid as a fence post, the only person who had insisted on accompanying her to this gathering, despite having no standing to be here. She'd come as a servant attendant, which was technically permissible and practically invisible, which suited Petra perfectly. "I know what they think," Josie said. "Your father's debt was cleared, legally, 7 years ago." Legal and believed are not the same thing. Petra was quiet for a moment. Around them, the hall continued its slow dispersal, wolves drifting toward the corridors, toward their guest quarters, toward their own packs and their own certainties. No one looked at Josie, not even to dismiss her. She had already been processed and filed away. "There's also talk," Petra said, more carefully now, "about what happened at the Vane gathering last spring." Josie felt her jaw tighten. "There's always talk. Beta Corwin told his alpha you refused him. I declined a private meeting in a room with no windows and a locked door. That is not the same as refusal. To his alpha it is." Josie finally turned to look at her. Really look. Taking in the careful worry in Petra's lined face, the way her hands were clasped too tightly at her waist, the particular stillness that meant she was holding something back. Josie had known this woman since she was 6 years old. She could read her the way she read weather. "What else?" Josie said. Not a question. Petra hesitated. And that hesitation, that single small crack in a woman who had never hesitated in her life, hit Josie somewhere soft and deep. "Your cousin arrived this afternoon," Petra said finally. "Rendell. He's been meeting with the Ashford Council since sundown." Josie went very still. Rendell, her father's brother's son, who had contested the estate the week after her father's burial, who had smiled at the reading of the will with the patient confidence of someone who already knew the outcome. He hadn't won then. The deed had been clear, the witnesses unimpeachable, the land and the small fortune her father had rebuilt from ruin had passed to Josie entirely. Rendell had left that day without a word. That had been 8 months ago. Why is he meeting with the council? Josie said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. I don't know, Petra said. But one of the serving girls, the youngest Harrow girl, you know her. She carried your cloak in. She heard something before they closed the room. She came to me because she didn't know what to do with it. Tell me. Petra looked at her for a long moment. Then she said quietly, the way you say things you wish you didn't have to. She heard your name, and she heard the word ward. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ward. Not wife, not mate, not partner. Ward. A ward was a legal classification under pack law, ancient, rarely invoked, deeply binding. It meant that a person of unmated status and contested or diminished standing could be placed under the legal guardianship of a male relative, stripping them of the right to hold property independently, to refuse formal presentation, to decline any arrangement made on their behalf. It was a mechanism that hadn't been widely used in decades, but it had never been removed from the compact. It existed in the law, the way rot exists in old wood, invisible until the floor gives way beneath you. If Rendall had gone to the Ashford Council, if he had argued that Josie's 3 consecutive rejections at the formal gathering constituted proof of her inability to secure a mate, and therefore her inability to manage an estate under pack protection, she stopped the thought, started it again, let it finish. If that argument was accepted, the estate would transfer to Rendall as guardian. The land, the accounts, the deed her father had bled for, everything. And she would have no standing to fight it, because she would no longer be considered a free woman under pack law. She would be a ward, a held thing. When is the council reconvening? She said. Dawn, Petra whispered. Josie looked at the dying candles, looked at the emptying hall, looked at the stone floor beneath her feet, cold even through the soles of her boots. She had until dawn. She thought very clearly, the way she always thought clearly in moments that should have broken her. I cannot fight this here, not tonight, not alone, in a hall where every alpha already looked through me. I need to be gone before they formalize it. Get our things, she said. Josie. Quietly, Petra. Don't wake anyone. Don't explain to anyone. Just get the bags and meet me at the side gate in 20 minutes. Petra looked at her with something that was not quite fear and not quite pride, but lived in the territory between them. Then she nodded once and moved. Josie did not run. Running attracted attention, and attention was the last thing she could afford. She walked at the measured, unhurried pace of a woman going nowhere in particular, down the east corridor, away from the council rooms, away from the voices still murmuring behind closed oak doors. Her mind ran the calculations with cold efficiency. The nearest town was 4 miles east along the Ridge Road. There was an inn there, the kind that asked no questions of women traveling at night, because it had learned the hard way that women traveling at night usually had better reasons than it had objections. She had enough coin for 3 nights, maybe 4 if she was careful. After that, she didn't know after that. She turned a corner and stopped. The side corridor was not empty. There was a man standing near the far window, alone, his back half turned toward her, looking out at the frost-pale courtyard below. He was tall, genuinely tall, not the performed height of men who needed to be seen, but the kind of height that exists without effort, without announcement. His shoulders filled the frame of the window. He wore dark clothing, no ceremonial marking, no pack insignia she could identify in the low torchlight. His hands were clasped behind his back. He turned his head slightly when she entered the corridor, just enough that she caught his profile. Sharp jaw, dark hair, the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm, but from absolute control. She didn't know his face, but something in her chest pulled tight, the way it does when a storm changes direction and you feel it in your teeth before you understand why. She kept walking. She needed to reach the gate. She was 4 steps past him when his voice reached her, low, unhurried, carrying the weight of someone who had never needed to raise it to be heard. Where are you going? He said. Not where are you going, just where are you going? As if he already knew the answer held something important, Josie stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She took 1 breath, measured, deliberate, and then she turned. He was looking at her now, fully. Not the way the Council Alphas had looked at her during the presentation, cataloging and dismissing, not the way Beta Corwin had looked at her, calculating angles. This man was simply looking, as if she were the most legible thing in the room, and he was only beginning to read. That, she said, keeping her voice even, is not your concern. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more considered than that. Perhaps, he said. But I'd like to ask you something first, if you'll allow it. Josie looked at him for a long moment, at the quiet authority in his posture, at the steadiness of his gaze, at the total absence of performance. Every man she had met at this gathering had wanted something from her, or had dismissed her as irrelevant. This man looked at her as though she were neither. It unsettled her more than either of the other options. "You have 30 seconds, she said. He nodded once, as if that were entirely reasonable. Then he asked her, quietly, simply, without preamble or decoration, the one question no one had ever thought to ask her before. "What do you want?" Josie heard the question, heard it fully, the way you hear something that lands in a frequency you didn't know you were waiting for. 4 words, utterly simple, and yet no one, not the 3 alphas who had turned from her, not the council members who had catalogued her lineage, not even her father in his most tender moments, had ever asked her that with such complete and unhurried attention. She studied the man in front of her. Up close, the details sharpened. He was older than she'd first estimated. Not old, but seasoned in the way that certain men become seasoned, not through time alone, but through weight carried and decisions made and survived. There was a scar along his left jaw, thin and pale, the kind left by something precise rather than something accidental. His eyes were dark gray, almost slate, and they had not moved from her face since he'd spoken. She realized she had been silent for too long. "That question," she said carefully, "depends entirely on who is asking it and why." "Fair," he said. He didn't add anything. Didn't explain himself, didn't offer his name, didn't fill the silence with the kind of noise men usually use to manage women they found inconvenient or interesting. He simply waited, as if her answer were worth waiting for. Something about that, the patience of it, the lack of pressure, made her more suspicious, not less. In her experience, men who waited without explaining themselves were usually constructing something. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. "Then I won't answer that question, not tonight." She glanced toward the end of the corridor. Petra would be at the side gate in less than 10 minutes. "Excuse me." She turned again. This time she made it 6 steps before he spoke. "Rendell Voss presented a wardship petition to the Ashford Council 2 hours ago," he said. "It will be ratified at dawn unless it is formally challenged by a party of superior standing." Josie stopped walking. The cold in the corridor suddenly felt different. Not the cold of stone and winter, but the cold of a door swinging open onto something vast and dark. She turned back slowly. "How do you know that?" she said. "Because I was asked to witness it." His voice was even, factual. "I declined." "Why?" "Because the petition is built on a distortion of the Compact's wardship clause. The clause was written to protect unmated women in genuine crisis, not to strip solvent women of property because their male relatives want it." He paused. "And because the 3 alphas who rejected you tonight were paid to do so." The floor did not move, but Josie felt it move, that specific, terrible sensation of something you had half suspected becoming suddenly, irrevocably real, like pressing a bruise you'd been avoiding and finding the bone underneath had already broken. "Paid," she repeated. Rendell needed 3 consecutive formal rejections on record to qualify for the wardship petition. 2 of the alphas he approached refused him. The 3rd found 3 who didn't. He said it the same way he said everything, without drama, without softening. "I'm sorry. You deserve to know." Josie looked at him for a long time. She was thinking very precisely, the way she always did when emotion threatened to overwhelm logic, building walls with facts, using reason as scaffolding. She had stood in that hall tonight and felt the particular humiliation of 3 men turning from her, and she had told herself it was the bloodline, the debt, her lack of standing. She had almost believed it, but it had been purchased, every moment of it. Her humiliation had been a line item in Rendell's plan. "You still haven't told me who you are," she said. Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that, distantly. He looked at her for a moment, and she had the strange sense that he was measuring something. Not her worth, not her lineage, but something more specific. Whether she could hold what he was about to say. "Cale," he said, "Ashford hosts my gathering. It is not my keep." He said it simply, without the weight that men with his name usually attach to it, but she understood it immediately. The reason the corridor had felt wrong from the moment she'd entered it, the reason his stillness carried that specific quality of absolute authority, the reason no insignia of any single pack marked his clothing. He was above the packs. He was the compact itself, the Alpha King. She had never seen him before. He rarely attended the annual gatherings in person. He sent delegates, signed documents, settled disputes through intermediaries. His presence here, in person, in this corridor, at this hour, should have felt monumental. Instead, it felt like the most dangerous thing that had happened to her all evening, and the evening had contained several candidates. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you asked the right question earlier," he said. "When I asked what you wanted, you didn't ask for comfort, or reassurance, or a husband. You asked who was asking and why. That's not a woman who needs to be managed. That's a woman who needs information." Josie said nothing. She was cataloging, reassessing, running every line of this conversation against the architecture of the situation. "What do you want from me?" she said finally. Because that was always the real question. That was always the thing underneath the thing. "Nothing yet," he said. "Tonight, I want to offer you a choice." He reached into the inner fold of his coat and produced a folded document. Heavy paper, sealed with dark wax. He held it out to her. "This is a formal challenge to the wardship petition, filed under compact authority. It cannot be ratified while this challenge is active. It buys you time, weeks, possibly more, while the petition is reviewed at the higher tribunal." Josie looked at the document, did not take it yet. "And the cost," she said. "You come with me tonight. Not as a prisoner, not as a ward. As a guest under compact protection, which is a legal status that supersedes any local petition." He paused. "Rendell cannot touch the estate or your person while you are formally under compact protection. He will know that by morning. And after the tribunal reviews the petition, we argue it down. The distortion of the clause is demonstrable. I have the testimony of the two alphas Rendell approached first, both of whom refused him and will speak to his intentions." A pause. "It is not certain, but it is a better position than the one you are currently standing in." Josie looked at the document again. Then she looked at him, at the steadiness of his face, the absence of any readable want in his expression. Men who wanted something from her always showed it somewhere, in the hands, in the eyes, in the particular quality of their attention. This man showed nothing except patience, and that quiet, inexorable authority, which meant either he wanted nothing, or he was exceptionally good at hiding it. Neither possibility was entirely comfortable. "I don't trust you," she said plainly. "You shouldn't," he said, with the same evenness. "You met me 4 minutes ago. Then why would I go anywhere with you?" "Because the alternative is leaving tonight with a housekeeper and 3 nights of coin while Rendell's petition goes unopposed at dawn." He said it without cruelty, without any performance of superiority. Just the facts, laid out without decoration. "You are intelligent enough to have already calculated that. I don't think you're asking because you need to be convinced. I think you're asking because you want to know if I'll answer honestly." Josie felt something shift very slightly in the architecture of her suspicion. Not collapse, not dissolve, just shift. Enough to let a sliver of something else in. She took the document from his hand, read it. The language was precise, the seal unmistakably authentic. The filing notation already marked with the compact tribunal's receipt stamp. He had filed it before he'd even spoken to her. He had filed it before he knew whether she would agree. "You filed this without my consent," she said. "I filed it on principle," he said. "The petition is an abuse of the compact. I would have challenged it regardless of whether you were here tonight. Your presence makes the challenge stronger, but it is not the reason I acted." Josie folded the document again, held it, felt the weight of the paper, the reality of the wax seal, the specific gravity of a decision made in a cold corridor at the edge of a night that had already taken too much from her. She thought about her father's face the day he'd finished rebuilding, the quiet pride of a man who had clawed something real back from ruin. She thought about the deed in its lacquered box at home, and the land behind the house where he'd planted 3 apple trees the spring before he died, and how Rendell had stood at the graveside with that patient, waiting smile. She thought about standing in that hall and feeling the third man turn away and knowing, somewhere below understanding, that it had been designed. "My housekeeper," she said. "She comes with me, of course. I will not be housed with your household staff or in rooms without a lock. You will have a full guest suite with a key that only you hold, and I want the names of the 2 alphas who refused Rendell, in writing, before we leave Ashford territory." Something moved in his gray eyes. Not surprise exactly, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, perhaps. The particular expression of a man encountering something he'd expected to be smaller than it was. "I'll have them written before the carriage reaches the east gate," he said. Josie looked at him for one more long moment. Then she put the document inside her own coat, straightened her spine, and said, "My housekeeper will be at the side gate in 6 minutes. We should move." She walked past him toward the gate. She did not look back to see if he followed. She didn't need to. She could feel him behind her, not the feeling of being followed by something threatening, but the feeling of walking alongside something solid, like moving parallel to a wall you hadn't known was there. It did not make her feel safe. She had stopped trusting the feeling of safety, but it made her feel, for the first time in a very long night, like she was moving in a direction instead of just moving. Petra was already at the gate when they arrived, 2 bags at her feet, her expression cycling through 4 emotions when she saw the man behind Josie. Josie held up one hand. "He's our way out," she said. "Ask questions in the carriage." Petra looked at Cale. Cale looked back at Petra with the same quiet steadiness he applied to everything. Petra picked up both bags without a word. They left Ashford Keep before the last candles died. Behind them, in a closed council room, Rendell Voss was still presenting his petition to men who did not yet know it had already been answered. The carriage that waited beyond the east gate was not what Josie had expected. She had prepared herself for something ostentatious, the kind of vehicle that announced power through gilded fittings and matched horses and liveried guards riding alongside. What she found instead was a dark, well-built carriage with no insignia. 2 horses the color of charcoal and a single driver who greeted Cale with a nod rather than ceremony. 4 guards rode at a distance, present but not hovering, close enough to matter and far enough to give the impression of privacy. It was the choice of a man who understood that real power didn't need to perform itself. Josie noted it, filed it away, did not let it soften her. She sat across from Cale in the interior. Petra pressed beside her with both bags at her feet and her hands folded in her lap, with the precise stillness of a woman choosing not to react to anything until she had more information. The carriage moved. The torchlight of Ashford Keep disappeared behind the tree line, swallowed by darkness and frost. Josie watched it go, felt nothing she could name cleanly. "The names," she said. Cale reached into his coat without hesitation and produced a folded sheet, already written. She took it, read it in the thin light coming through the carriage window. 2 names, 2 pack designations, 2 brief lines describing what each man had been approached to do and had refused. His handwriting was spare and clear, the kind that communicated without ornamentation. She folded it and kept it. "Where are we going?" she said. "Caerwyn," he said. 3 hours east. "It is compact neutral territory. No single pack holds authority there. Your petition challenge will be heard at the Tribunal House, and you will be under full compact protection for the duration." "And how long is the duration?" "However long it takes to dismantle the petition completely." He said it without flourish, as if it were simply a fact of the immediate future. Rendell's argument rests on the wardship clause. The clause requires proof that the woman in question has no viable path to a legitimate match and no capacity to manage her estate independently. We will demonstrate that both conditions are false. The rejections are on record, Josie said. 3 of them. Tonight. 3 purchased rejections, which we can prove were coordinated. The testimony of the 2 alphas Rendell approached first will establish intent. Beyond that, he paused, and she had the sense he was choosing his next words with care. The council will need to see that you are not without options. Josie looked at him steadily. Meaning that your presence under my protection will be interpreted by anyone paying attention as something more than administrative. He met her gaze without flinching. I am not suggesting anything that requires your agreement tonight. I am telling you how it will appear, because you asked for honesty, and you deserve to have the full picture. Petra made a small sound beside her. Josie didn't look at her. You're saying they'll think I'm your... "They'll think you're being considered," he said. "That is different. And under compact law, a woman being formally considered by the Alpha King cannot be subject to a wardship petition by a lesser party. It is an automatic stay." Josie absorbed this. The logic was clean. The protection was real. The implication was enormous. "And you," she said. "What do you think?" Something moved in his expression, not the calculation she'd been bracing for, but something quieter, more careful. "I think you are the most composed person I have encountered at an Ashford gathering in 11 years, he said, "and I think Rendell Voss made a catastrophic miscalculation when he decided you were someone who could be managed." He looked at her evenly. "What I think beyond that is not your concern tonight. Tonight you need rest and safety. The rest can wait." Josie held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she turned to the window and watched the dark forest move past in silence. She did not sleep, but she let herself be still, which was its own small mercy. Caerwyn was a walled town built into the slope of a granite ridge, the kind of place that had existed for so long it had stopped trying to be impressive and had simply become permanent. The tribunal house sat at its center, broad-shouldered stone, arched windows, torches burning at the entrance despite the early hour. Someone had been told to expect them. Josie's room was on the upper floor, as promised. Stone walls, a fireplace already lit, a bed with heavy linen and a wool blanket the color of winter moss. A key on the table, as promised. A window that looked out over the courtyard below, the kind of window she could see from but not easily be seen through from the street. She stood at it for a while after Petra had gone to her own adjacent room. The town was quiet, frost on the cobblestones, a dog somewhere, distant. The smell of wood smoke and cold air and, faintly, pine. She thought about her father's estate, the 3 apple trees, the lacquered box with the deed inside. She thought about Rendell at the council table, patient and waiting, the same smile he'd worn at the graveside. She thought about how thoroughly she had been set up. Not just tonight, but over months. Possibly longer. The Vane gathering last spring, where she'd declined Beta Corwin's private meeting. Had that been part of it too? Had her reputation been carefully shaped across multiple gatherings, each incident feeding the next, building the record that Rendell needed? She pressed her hand flat against the cold window glass. "You are not powerless," she told herself. "You are behind. That is different." In the morning, she asked to see the tribunal's copy of the wardship petition. The clerk who brought it to her was young and visibly uncertain about whether he was permitted to do this. Josie looked at him with the calm authority of a woman who had decided she was done asking for permission to understand her own situation. And he brought it. She read every line. Rendell had been thorough. She would give him that. The petition cited the 3 rejections, cited her father's old debt, cleared but cited nonetheless, cited the absence of a male guardian since her father's death, and cited a clause she hadn't known existed. A provision that allowed a wardship petition to proceed if the woman in question could be shown to have refused legitimate approaches, which could be construed as willful rejection of pack integration. Beta Corwin. Last spring. It was there in the petition, documented. Her refusal of his private meeting framed as refusal of a formal approach. She set the papers down, breathed. Then she picked them up again and started marking every point that could be challenged. She was still working when Kyle knocked. 3 precise knocks, unhurried, and opened the door at her word. He looked at the spread of papers on the table, at the notations she'd made in the margins, at her face, which she knew was still and readable only to people who knew how to look. He did not comment on the papers. He set a cup of tea on the table beside her, stepped back, and said, "The tribunal clerk confirmed the challenge is formally active. Rendell will have received notice by now." "He'll move faster," she said. "Yes. He'll try to find another angle, something that doesn't require the wardship clause." She looked up. "He needs the estate before the tribunal finishes deliberating. If the challenge drags long enough, he loses the window where the legal ambiguity works in his favor." Kyle looked at her for a moment. "That is exactly right. So we need more than the challenge," she said. "We need to close every door he can use while the tribunal is slow." She turned one of the marked pages toward him. "The Corwin incident. The petition frames it as refusal of a formal approach, but it wasn't formally registered. If it had been a legitimate formal approach, it would have been recorded with the Pack Council of Record. It wasn't. I need confirmation of that from the Vane Pack's own records. Kale sat down across from her without being invited. She noted it, the presumption of it, and also the naturalness of it. The way he sat not as a man taking space, but as a man entering a conversation he intended to be part of. I can have someone at the Vane Pack house within 2 days, he said. I also want to know who paid the 3 alphas tonight. Not just that they were paid. I want to know the amount, the method, and whether there is a record. She looked at him directly. Rendell is not subtle. He uses coin because he doesn't have other currency. Which means there are transactions. Which means there is a trail. You've been thinking about this since the carriage, he said. I've been thinking about this since I read the petition this morning, she said. I've been angry about it since last night. I separated the two things because anger is not useful in the short term. Something moved in his face, that same quality of recognition she'd seen in the corridor at Ashford. That expression of encountering something larger than expected. It was not condescension. It was not surprise, exactly. It was the specific attention of a man who had stopped cataloging and started actually listening. The anger will be useful, he said. Eventually. I know, she said. I'm saving it. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the town was waking, the sound of horses, of a market opening somewhere, of voices carrying on cold air. The fire had burned down to deep orange coals. There is one more thing, he said. His voice had shifted slightly, not softer, but more deliberate. Something I found last night, after you were settled. Josie set down her pen, waited. Rendell filed a secondary document with the Ashford Council, Kale said. Separate from the wardship petition. It was buried in the administrative filings, which is why it wasn't immediately visible. He placed a single page on the table between them. It is a transfer of guardianship pre-authorization. It names a recipient for the estate in the event that the wardship petition is granted, and you are subsequently determined to be, and I am reading this directly, unable to fulfill the responsibilities of the ward arrangement due to incapacity or absence. Josie looked at the page, read the language he had quoted, read it again. Incapacity or absence, she said slowly. It is written broadly enough to include death, Kale said. He said it plainly, because she had established early that she wanted plainness. Rendell is not planning to manage you as a ward. He is planning to make the ward arrangement brief. The fire crackled. Outside, someone laughed at something in the market. The world went on making its ordinary sounds, while Josie sat with the knowledge that her cousin had not just planned to take her estate. He had planned to take her life. She did not cry. She did not shake. She pressed both palms flat on the table and looked at the document and let the full shape of it settle into her. The months of construction, the careful layering of legal mechanisms, the purchased rejections, the framed refusals, all of it built toward this single point, a clean, legal, unquestioned disappearance. Then she looked up at Kale. Now, she said quietly, I'm ready to use the anger. The next 4 days moved with the particular intensity of a clock winding tight. Josie worked. That was the only way she knew how to metabolize fear, convert it into motion, into precision, into a series of tasks that could be completed and crossed off and built into something that pushed back. She rose before the tribunal house opened each morning. She read every document Kale's people brought her. She annotated, she questioned, she mapped the architecture of Rendell's plan the way a surgeon maps a wound before cutting, not with hatred, not yet, but with the cold clarity of someone who needed to understand the full damage before deciding how to repair it. Kale gave her space. That was the first thing she noticed, and the thing she kept returning to in the quieter moments. He did not hover. He did not check in with the frequency of a man managing a situation. He appeared when there was information, when there was a decision that required her input, when something had moved in the tribunal proceedings. He knocked before entering. He sat only when invited. He brought tea twice without being asked and left without making anything of it. She watched him the way she watched everything, carefully, from a slight distance, looking for the seam where the performance ended and the want began. She hadn't found it yet. On the second day, his man returned from the Vane Pack house with confirmation. Beta Corwin's approach at the spring gathering had never been formally registered with the Vane Pack Council of Record. It had been conducted entirely outside the official channels, which meant it could not legally constitute a formal approach under compact law. The petition's central pillar cracked. On the third day, a compact investigator Kale had dispatched to the financial records of the 3 alphas, who had rejected her at Ashford, returned with something better than expected. Not just evidence of payment, but a letter. Handwritten. In Rendell's own script, outlining the arrangement with enough specificity that it constituted direct proof of coordinated fraud against the compact's formal presentation process. The man had kept it. Insurance, probably, the kind of document a person holds on to when they've done something they're not certain the other party will honor. Josie held the letter in both hands and read it 3 times. Then she set it down and said, "To no one in particular." He wrote it down. "Arrogant men frequently do," Petra said from the chair by the window, where she had taken up what appeared to be a permanent position of watchful knitting. "It's enough for criminal fraud," Josie said. "Not just the wardship challenge. Actual criminal fraud against the compact. That carries expulsion from pack standing." "It carries more than that," Cale said from the doorway. She hadn't heard him knock. She looked up. He was holding another document, different paper, different weight. And his expression had the particular quality of stillness it got when the information was significant. "May I come in?" "You're already in the doorway," she said. "That's different from being in the room." She looked at him for a moment, then she gestured to the chair across from her. He sat, set the document on the table, did not push it toward her, simply placed it where she could reach it when she chose to. "What is it?" she said. "A letter from your father's former solicitor," he said. "My people found him in a town 2 days south of your estate. He had been discouraged from maintaining contact with you after your father's death. He received a visit from one of Rendell's men 8 months ago, shortly after the will reading." He paused. "He was told that if he produced any documentation contradicting the debt narrative, the story that your father's financial recovery was incomplete, that the estate carried hidden liabilities, there would be consequences for his family." Josie's hand moved toward the document. Stopped. She looked at Cale. "He was threatened," she said. "Yes, and now?" "He is currently in compact protective custody and is willing to testify fully." Cale's voice was even. "He also brought his records. Your father's estate has no outstanding liabilities. None. The debt was cleared entirely 7 years ago, as you knew, and the recovery was complete. The narrative Rendell has been circulating, the suggestion that the estate was financially fragile, that you lacked the capacity to manage it, was fabricated from nothing." Josie sat with that for a moment. Her father's name, dragged through the same mud he'd spent a decade climbing out of, used as ammunition against the daughter he'd left everything to. She pressed her thumbnail into the edge of the table and held the feeling until it sharpened into something usable. "He threatened a solicitor's family," she said quietly. "Yes. To suppress financial records." "Yes. While simultaneously bribing alphas and constructing a legal mechanism to have me declared a ward, and then..." She stopped, let out a slow breath. How long had he been planning this? "Based on the timeline of the financial records and the first contact with Corwin's pack," Cale said. "At least 18 months. 18 months. Since before her father had died. Perhaps," and this thought arrived with a particular quality of cold, perhaps even accelerated by her father's death. Perhaps Rendell had been waiting for that specific event. The removal of the one person who had always stood between Josie and the full exposure of her legal vulnerability. She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the courtyard below without really seeing it. "I want to go home," she said. Not plaintively, not with any softness. It was a strategic statement. "I want to be at the estate when the tribunal ruling comes down. I want Rendell to see me walk back through the front gate of the property he tried to take, while the ruling is being delivered." Behind her, she heard Cale stand. "The tribunal needs 2 more days to formalize the fraud finding. After that, the wardship petition is not just denied, it is expunged. Rendell faces criminal compact charges, which means his pack standing is immediately suspended pending investigation. 2 days, she said. 2 days. She turned from the window. He was standing a few feet away, not close. Not performing distance either, simply present in the way she was beginning to recognize as specifically his. She looked at his face, and found the same thing she always found there. Attention, steadiness, nothing she could easily dismiss or categorize. "Why did you do this?" she said. He looked at her without evasion. "I told you. The petition was an abuse of the compact. You filed the challenge before you spoke to me. You dispatched investigators within hours. You've been in this tribunal house for 4 days on my behalf. She held his gaze. That is more than administrative principle. The silence between them had a different quality than previous silences. Less space, somehow. More gravity. Yes, he said finally. It is. He didn't add anything. She had the sense he was choosing, actively, deliberately, not to press further than that single admission. Not because he was hiding something, but because he understood that she needed to reach things herself. That arriving at conclusions she'd been pushed toward was not the same as arriving at them. It was the most careful thing anyone had ever done for her, and she wasn't entirely sure she knew what to do with it. She looked away first. I'm going to need something formal to wear when we return to the estate, she said, returning to practicality, because practicality was solid, and she needed solid ground. Something that communicates standing. Not mourning colors, not supplication colors. Something that says the woman who lives here came back. I'll have something sent up this evening, he said, without hesitation, without making it significant. And I want to be the one who tells Rendell, she said. Not a clerk, not a courier. I want to be present when he receives the tribunal's finding. That can be arranged. I also want the names of every alpha or official he contacted in the last 18 months. Everyone who was part of this, whether they participated or refused. I want a complete picture. Josie. He said her name for the first time. She felt it. Not with alarm, but with a particular awareness, the way you feel the change in air pressure before weather arrives. You will have everything. Every name, every document, every piece of the picture. I promise you that. She looked at him. You promise easily for a man I've known 4 days. I promise carefully, he said. There's a difference. That night, after Petra had gone to sleep and the tribunal house had gone quiet, Josie sat by the fire in her room and let herself feel, very briefly, the full weight of what the last 4 days had contained. The manufactured rejections, her father's memory weaponized, the document that had named her possible death as a legal contingency, the solicitor frightened into silence. 18 months of careful construction aimed at a single outcome, her erasure. She let herself feel all of it, then she folded it. The way you fold something you intend to carry but not be carried by. There was a soft sound at the door, not a knock. Just a presence. She had come to recognize that too. I'm awake, she said. The door opened slightly. Cale stood in the frame, still dressed, a faint line of firelight catching the angle of his jaw. I saw the light, he said. I couldn't sleep. He was quiet for a moment, then, neither could I. She looked at him across the room. He looked back. The fire made everything warmer than it was, and the distance between them felt measurable in a way it hadn't before. Not vast, not safe, not dangerous either. Something in between. Something that was asking to be named. You don't have to stand in the doorway, she said. He came in, sat in the chair across the hearth, said nothing. The fire spoke instead, the soft collapse of a log, the hiss of resin, the particular language of warmth that needed no translation. My father planted 3 apple trees the spring before he died, she said. She didn't know why she said it. It came out before she decided to offer it. He said they'd take 3 years to fruit properly. He wouldn't have known he wasn't going to see them. Cale listened. Did not fill the pause. They fruited last autumn, she said. The first time. I didn't tell anyone. Why not? Because there was no one to tell who would understand why it mattered. He looked at her across the fire. His eyes in this light were not gray so much as deep, the color of the sky at the last moment before full dark, when it still holds something of the day. It mattered, he said quietly, because he planted them in faith, and the faith was right. Josie looked at the fire. Something in her chest, tight and careful and long held, moved very slightly, like the first give of a knot that has been pulled too long in one direction. She did not cry, but she stayed by the fire for another hour. And Kyle stayed too, and neither of them spoke again, and somehow that was the most honest thing that had happened to her in longer than she could measure. They returned to the estate on a gray morning, the kind that held its breath before deciding whether to rain. Josie sat straight in the carriage the entire 3 hours, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the road ahead. She was wearing deep green, the dress that had been sent to her room the evening before, wool and structured, with a high collar and simple silver buttons, the kind of garment that said, I am here, and I am permanent without needing to announce itself. Petra had done her hair without being asked, pinning it back with a precision that communicated occasion. Neither of them had spoken much. There was nothing left to prepare. Everything had already been decided. The tribunal's formal ruling had come down that morning before dawn. The wardship petition expunged, the fraud finding formalized, Rendell Voss stripped of his pack-standing pending criminal compact investigation. The document sat in Josie's coat, folded precisely, the seal unbroken because she intended to break it herself, in the right place, at the right moment. Cale rode alongside the carriage rather than inside it. She could see him through the window when the road curved. Dark coat, straight posture. The gray horse moving beneath him with the same unhurried steadiness that characterized everything about him. He had said very little since they'd left Caerwyn. He seemed to understand that this morning belonged to her, that whatever came next needed to be hers to walk into. She had not told him what the night by the fire had done to something inside her. She was not ready to name it yet. But she knew it had happened, the way you know a door has opened even when you haven't walked through it. The estate gate came into view as the road crested the last ridge. It was smaller than she remembered, or perhaps she had grown, in the way people grow when terrible things force them to take up more space. The iron gate stood open. She had sent word ahead, through compact channels, that she was returning, and someone on the staff had prepared. The long drive was lined with bare-limbed trees, their branches laced with frost that caught the flat morning light and held it. The house at the end was stone and timber, solid and unspectacular, the kind of house that had been built to last rather than to impress. Her father's house. Her house. The carriage stopped at the front steps. Josie descended without waiting for assistance, not from pride, but because her feet needed to be on this ground immediately, needed to feel the gravel under her boots and confirm that it was still real. It was real. She stood there for one breath, just one. Let the cold air in, let it settle in her lungs alongside everything the last 4 days had contained. Then she turned. Rendell was on the steps. He had arrived before her. She had expected that. He had received the tribunal's courier 2 hours ago at minimum, and he had come here because this was the only ground he had left to stand on. He was a man of medium height and unremarkable features, with the particular look of someone who had spent his life being underestimated and had decided to make that his strategy. He wore his pack colors still, which was either ignorance or defiance. His standing was suspended, which meant the colors meant nothing, but he was wearing them anyway. He looked at her. Then at Kyle, who had dismounted and stood a precise distance behind her left shoulder. Present, visible, not obscuring her. Then back at her. "Josie," he said. His voice had the quality of a man recalibrating. "I think there has been a significant misunderstanding." "There hasn't," she said. She walked up the steps. He did not move aside immediately. A small reflexive assertion of space, the habit of a man who had spent 18 months believing this moment was going to go differently. She stopped one step below him and looked at him with the full, undivided attention of someone who was no longer afraid of what she might find. "I have the tribunal's ruling," she said. "Fraud against the compact, coordinated manipulation of the formal presentation process, suppression of legal testimony through intimidation." She tilted her head slightly. The secondary document was particularly instructive. The one with the pre-authorization for estate transfer in the event of my incapacity or absence. Something moved in Rendell's face. Not guilt. Men like him didn't move through guilt easily. But the specific recalibration of a plan encountering its own failure. The smile was still there, vestigial, no longer attached to anything real. "That document was a contingency," he said. "Standard legal." "It was a blueprint," she said. "And it is now in the compact's criminal file, along with the letter you wrote to the 3 alphas. Which, and I do want you to understand this part clearly, one of them kept." She reached into her coat and produced the tribunal ruling, held it out to him. "You are welcome to read this, or I can have it read to you. I want to be certain you understand every word." He looked at the document in her hand, did not take it. "Your standing is suspended," she continued, her voice even and unhurried. "You will be summoned to the compact tribunal within 30 days for the criminal hearing. You will not enter this property, contact this estate's staff, or communicate with anyone connected to my affairs through any channel, direct or intermediary. If you do, the compact's enforcement arm will treat it as contempt, which carries immediate detention." She lowered the document. Do you understand what I've said? Rendell looked at her for a long moment. She could see him calculating the angles, the remaining options, whether there was anything left to leverage. She watched him find nothing, watched the calculation end. Your father, he said. And she recognized this, the last resort of a man with no moves left, the reaching for something personal, would not have wanted. My father, she said quietly, planted 3 apple trees the spring before he died. He built this estate from nothing, cleared every debt, and left it to me because he knew what I was capable of. Do not use his name in my presence again. Rendell said nothing. Leave, she said. He left. She watched him walk down the drive until he reached the gate. Watched the gate close behind him. Watched the frost-lined trees stand perfectly still on either side of the empty drive. Then she turned and walked into her house. The staff had lit fires in the main rooms. The smell of the house, wood polish and old stone, and the particular warmth of a building that has been inhabited long enough to absorb the lives lived inside it, reached her the moment she crossed the threshold, and she stopped, just for a second, and let it in. Petra moved past her efficiently, already directing the housekeeper, already making the house function. This was her gift. The ability to restore order to places that had been disrupted. To move through chaos with a broom and a purpose. Josie watched her and felt, beneath the cold clarity of the morning, a warmth she hadn't expected. Cale stood in the entrance behind her. She turned. Thank you, she said, for what you did. All of it. He looked at her steadily. You did most of it. You filed the challenge before I agreed to anything, she said. You found the solicitor. You had the letter. You gave me every piece of information I needed, and then you let me decide what to do with it. She held his gaze. That is not a small thing. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said, it isn't. She looked at him. This man who had appeared in a corridor when she was 4 minutes from running into the dark, who had asked her one question that no one had thought to ask, who had sat by her fire in the small hours and said the faith was right and understood immediately why 3 apple trees mattered, who had ridden beside her carriage all morning and said nothing and been exactly what she needed anyway. She thought about the mate bond. She had felt it. Not with the blazing, unambiguous certainty the stories described, but in the quieter way that truth sometimes arrives. As a gradual accumulation of evidence, each piece unremarkable alone, undeniable together. The way her breathing had steadied in his presence even when she was determined not to let it. The way the room had a different quality when he was in it. The way his voice had said her name that one time, and she had felt it in the place where she kept her most guarded things. She had told herself it was circumstance, proximity, gratitude. She was finished telling herself that. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. What you said in the corridor at Ashford. That you wanted to ask me something, if I'd allow it. She held his gaze. You asked what I wanted, and I didn't answer. No, he said. You didn't. I'm answering now. She took a breath. I want the estate, and my father's name fully restored, and Rendell to answer for what he planned. I want the solicitor's family compensated for the threat they lived under. I want the apple trees to fruit again next autumn. She paused. And I want to know if what I think is happening between us is something you also believe is real. Because I don't make decisions based on bonds or destiny or things I didn't choose. I make them based on evidence, and the evidence... She stopped, steadied herself. The evidence is significant. Kyle looked at her for a long moment. In the firelight from the open parlor door, his eyes were that particular shade she had come to recognize as the color of his attention. Deep and still and entirely focused on her. Yes, he said, I believe it is real. A pause. I have believed it since the corridor. I was waiting for you to arrive at it yourself, because arriving at it yourself is the only version that matters. You were very patient, she said. You were worth being patient for. She looked at him. He looked back. The house settled around them, the fires breathing in the cold rooms. Petra's voice carrying from somewhere deeper inside, the frost outside beginning, finally, to release into the thin winter light. She crossed the distance between them, took his hand, deliberately, consciously, with full knowledge of what she was doing, and held it. His fingers closed around hers with the same quality his presence always had. Solid, unhurried, certain without being heavy. "I'm not finished being angry," she said. "I know. And I'm not finished wanting justice. I know that too. So whatever this is," she said, "it has to hold both of those things, not soften them, not replace them. Josie." He said her name the way he always said it, like it deserved the full weight of his attention. "I am not here to soften anything. I am here because you are exactly who you are." She held his hand and looked at her father's house, the house that was hers, that had always been hers, that a year of careful legal machinery had failed to take from her, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could trace, that the ground beneath her feet was exactly where she had put it. In the months that followed, the Compact Tribunal concluded its criminal investigation into Rendell Voss. He was found guilty on 4 counts of fraud against the Compact, 1 count of intimidation of a legal witness, and 1 count of conspiracy. The secondary document, the blueprint for her disappearance, carrying the heaviest weight of all. He was expelled from pack standing permanently and sentenced to 5 years of supervised exile from all Compact territories. He left without a word to anyone. Josie did not watch him go. She had said everything she needed to say on the front steps of her estate, and she saw no reason to repeat herself. The solicitor, an elderly man named Fenn, who had served her father faithfully for 20 years, was restored to full standing and compensated from the Compact's fraud recovery fund. He wept when Josie met with him in person, and she let him, and said only that her father had always spoken well of him, which was true, and which seemed to be the thing he most needed to hear. Beta Corwin of the Vane Pack was formally censured by the Compact Tribunal for his participation in the coordinated rejection scheme. He lost his Beta standing and was reduced to common pack member status. A quiet, permanent humiliation of exactly the kind his actions had deserved. The 3 alphas who had been paid were fined and publicly recorded in the Compact's fraud register. 2 submitted full testimony in exchange for reduced penalty. The 3rd contested it, lost, and paid twice. Josie found this mildly satisfying, and did not pretend otherwise. The estate flourished. Josie managed it herself, as she always had, with Petra beside her and Fenn's restored counsel available by correspondence. She made 2 improvements her father had planned but never completed: a new roof on the east wing and a proper drainage channel through the lower field. And she made one he hadn't planned: a reading room in the south-facing corner of the upper floor, with tall windows and shelves she filled slowly and deliberately over the following year. The apple trees fruited again the following autumn. 3 of them, heavy and unhurried, the way things fruit when they've been properly rooted. Josie picked the first apple herself, on a morning in early October with the light coming low and gold across the orchard, and she stood there for a while with it in her hand, and did not say anything, because some things are complete without words. Cale came and went through those months with the same quality he'd always had: present when presence mattered, absent when she needed room, constant in the way that very few things in her life had managed to be constant. They argued twice, once about the pace of the tribunal proceedings, once about a council decision she thought he'd handled with insufficient directness. Both times he listened without deflecting, and both times she respected him more afterward than before. The formal recognition came in the spring, at the Compact's annual assembly, not with ceremony or announcement, but with Cale standing beside her at the council table and introducing her to the assembled alphas by name and by standing, and every person in that room understanding precisely what it meant. The 3 men who had turned from her at Ashford Keep were present. She did not look at them. She did not need to. She was not their Luna. She was not a title or a position appended to someone else's power. She was Josie, of the Marin estate, mate to the Alpha King by choice, her choice, made with full knowledge and clear eyes, on the steps of her own house, with her father's land beneath her feet, and 3 apple trees fruiting behind her. She stood at that council table and spoke when she had something to say, and was quiet when she didn't, and felt the room receive her, not with the careful indifference she had learned to recognize too young, not with the cataloging dismissal of the formal presentations, but with the specific attention given to someone who has already proven, through action and endurance and the refusal to be erased, that she belongs exactly where she is standing. It was not a perfect world. It would continue to ask hard things of her. She knew that. But the ground was hers. The house was hers. The choice had been hers, and that, at the end of everything, was the only answer that had ever mattered.